All right, everybody, welcome back to Budgeting 101. I'm Jay Copeland, and today on session 3 of our Budgeting 101 sessions here, we're going to talk about debt. So, what is debt? It's been on your mind, and it's a big reality for most students. I know that I've experienced debt. It's likely that in some form you have experienced debt in your time, either before being a student or as a student. And it's something that you're looking at managing for a time after you graduate, but it doesn't mean that you can't work on managing it now. We've talked about savings and living below your means, but you've probably thought, how can I possibly do that when I have all of this debt? So, it can be sort of a steep mountain to climb and something that seems like unreachable at the time. But if we talk about it now and start looking at ways in which you can manage your debt as you're going through school, you'll be much better prepared to understand the steps that it's going to take to tackle paying off that debt once you've graduated. So, debt is that uncomfortable thing that most of us have to agree to when we borrow money. So, ultimately, debt is exactly that. It's us borrowing money from somebody or an institution in order to afford something that we wouldn't have otherwise been able to afford. Common forms of student debt that you're likely to experience are OSAP, which is the Ontario Student Assistance Program. If you don't have OSAP, maybe you have a line of credit, like a student line of credit through a financial institution. If you're making smaller purchases such as textbooks or things, maybe you're using a credit card to put that on if you don't have money available immediately. There's other forms of loans like payday loans and things, which I hope you're avoiding. We'll talk about those more in depth later, but just be aware that there are other types of loans and things like overdraft fees and things for when you've taken more money than you have. So let's start looking at some of those in more detail. This is a bit of a longer presentation today, so we're going to get into it as quickly as possible. OSAP is going to be the first thing that we talk about here. So post-secondary students commonly apply for OSAP to assist with paying their fees. Some important things to know about OSAP specifically is you have 6 months after graduating or leaving full-time studies before you need to start the repayment. So they're not asking for repayment or payments to be made as you're going through school. It's something that you can sort of put aside until the end of your education or when you leave your studies. And then you have a bit of a grace period to get a job so that you can get some income flowing before you start making those repayments. One of the things that you need to note is after September 1st, 2019, so now, you're charged interest during your 6-month grace period, but not before that. So you'll be charged interest at any point in time sort of after you've graduated. Now, the interest rate is something that's important to know for anything that you've taken out a loan on or have sort of debt to or the credit owing on. So for OSAP, the current sort of interest rates are either for Ontario, it's prime rate plus 1%. It's important to know that the current prime rate is 2.45%. So that would be a total of 3.45%. And then Canada is prime rate plus 2.5%. So you're looking at just under 5% there. The other nice thing with OSAP is that repayment assistance is available, so they can help you with creating a plan for repayment in the event that you find you're struggling. So there is a bit of security involved there that allows you to better manage the repayment of those funds so that you're not finding yourself in financial jeopardy for taking an education. So some of your other options are the student line of credit, which you can get through your financial institution. Essentially, it's a line of credit focused on helping students pay for their education. One thing that you need to know is different than OSAP is the repayment of your student line of credit starts immediately, so you are required to make monthly payments. However, it does have a typically lower interest rate than OSAP would, so prime rate plus 1%, and as we talked, prime rate was 2.45%, so you're looking at 3.5% roughly. It is lower on average than OSAP repayment rates. It's also nice that you can consolidate your debts into your line of credit and pay the interest on your line of credit rather than, say, your credit card. So We will talk about credit cards next, but what you need to know is like the percentage rate on this is looking at 3.5% versus like a credit card, which could, on average be up to 20%. So it's actually good to like, pay your credit card debt into your line of credit if you can. One of the downsides to this for the student line of credit is that repayment assistance is not usually available to help you pay off these loans, which is, in contrast to OSAP, where they have like a plan to help you with the repayment afterwards. Student line of credit, you're kind of on your own with making sure that you're taking care of those payments. You can also get into a little bit more trouble with a student line of credit because they do allow like a higher lending amount, so you can take more credit from a student line of credit than you would be able to receive from OSAP for larger amounts of money, which means if you don't have that sort of repayment assistance available and you don't have like a plan for paying this off, you could find yourself in a bit more trouble. So let's look at credit cards specifically, because typically we all use credit cards. Credit cards tend to have a much higher interest rate, and carrying a balance runs you into danger of losing money to what we call compound interest. So things that you need to know about credit cards, similar to your student line of credit, repayment starts immediately. You're typically looking at a 19.99%, let's call it 20% plus interest rate on average throughout sort of the year. So that's calculated as the APR, the annual percentage rate. So they have a little bit of an example there. So 20% of your credit balance is divided by the 365 days per the year to give you your daily interest rate. Now, what happens is if you're carrying a balance on your credit card for whatever reason at the time of repayment, so this is something you're going to want to check, is like, what is the date that your credit card takes a look at repaying? For me, it's the middle of the month. For you, it might be the end of the month. It's something to check in and find out what day that is. So if you can't pay that balance off entirely, compound interest will build on the amount that you have in your account. So compound interest is essentially interest on your interest. So if you're owing 20% of an amount, and suddenly that adds up to like a $5, sort of addition to your account balance. So instead of owing $100, you now owe $105 at the end of the year. The interest now becomes on $105 instead of your original $100. So it builds over time. So instead of it being $5, the next year you would owe like $6 on top of that, which doesn't seem like much when it's a smaller amount of money, but it does build up over time. And the more money that you kind of like have owing, it's important to know that there's a significant difference between, the 20% interest you could be owing on a credit card versus like the 3.5% interest if you rolled it into your student line of credit, which we discussed on the last slide. So be very careful with credit cards. Ask your bank about options for lower interest credit cards if you can. A lot of the time we'll get lured in with like, benefits, maybe rewards cards and things like that. But if you're in a position where you're carrying a balance on your card constantly and you can't pay it off to zero before that repayment sort of date comes up every month, you should be looking into a lower interest credit card. Okay? So let's take a look at how we can manage our debt. Debt management strategies. These are sort of like three common strategies that focus on a couple of different aspects of like repaying your debt. So the different methods are either like repaying, typically you're looked at either repaying your highest rate of interest versus the lowest dollar balance. So getting rid of the thing that's going to cost you the most over the long run, or getting rid of the thing that you can get rid of quickest so you just don't have to worry about it anymore. So the three kind of methods that we look at, the two main ones are the Avalanche Method, which focuses on taking the highest interest rate first down to the lowest interest rate to get rid of that compound interest accruing over time, or the Snowball Method, which focuses on getting rid of the lowest like dollar balance first so that you have to repay less sort of lines of credit over time. And then there's a hybrid method, which, typically like something along the lines of you get rid of your lowest balance first so that you can feel good about yourself, and then you go from the highest to lowest interest rate because that's the most effective way to save you money over time, but isn't as like emotionally rewarding as having like eliminated a source of debt entirely. So let's look at some example scenarios here. Let's say you've got a credit card debt at $2,000 at 20% interest. You've got OSAP at $12,000 at 3.5% interest, after your graduation or departure. And then student line of credit at $10,000 with 2.5% interest. So if we look at the Avalanche method, that's going to ask us to order our debts from most expensive, highest interest rate, to least expensive, and pay the minimum each month on all lines of credit, because you do have to pay the minimums, otherwise you get sort of charged. Except the first one in order, which you put as much money towards paying off as possible. So whatever has the highest interest rate first. The benefits of this approach are it's mathematically sound in that you're getting rid of what's costing you the most over time the fastest, and you're reducing the amount that it's costing you. It reduces interest payments quicker. In order to sort of succeed, because one of the downsides of this is you don't feel as emotionally validated, so you're not knocking off the number of sort of like lines of credit or debts that you're owing faster. You want to set like milestones to feel emotionally validated. So like every $2,000 you pay off, you sort of celebrate to yourself a little bit so that you are succeeding in your goal of making these payments and reducing your debt as quickly as possible. But again, the downsides are that the results aren't as easily visually understood. You may have three sort of debts, like your OSAP, student line of credit, and credit card, existing for a longer period of time as opposed to getting rid of one entirely. So if you look at this example scenario again, you're currently at school. The lines of interest that you got here are $8,000 at 3.5% interest after graduation or departure. Your student line of credit is again $10,000 at 2.5% interest, and you've got a credit card debt of $2,000 at 20% interest. So what should you begin repaying first? If you're looking at the Avalanche method that we talked about previously, you're looking at the highest rate of interest first and then removing things. So you'd be looking at the 20% interest credit card being paid off first, followed by the 3.5% interest OSAP, and then the last one that you would work on paying off is the student line of credit at 2.5% interest. So an alternative method is the Snowball Method. You're ordering your debts from lowest to highest dollar balance or value, and you pay the minimum on each month on all lines of credit, except the first one in that order, which you will put as much money towards paying off as possible. So similar method, except now you're focusing on getting rid of the one with the lowest balance. It's a rewarding way to see a debt paid off quickly. It's very exciting to be like, yes, I got rid of a line of credit, or I got my credit card is totally paid off, and now I can focus on this next one. So it is the fastest way to eliminate a source of compound interest and just get rid of it entirely. But one word of caution with the Snowball Method is that some sources of significantly higher interest should not be ignored. So if you have like a credit card balance of $10,000 with 20 to 30% interest on it, and you're trying to pay off something with $9,000 with a 5% interest rate on it, it's not significant enough that you should ignore the 20 to 30% interest that's going to build over time. So let's take a quick look at the example scenarios for the Snowball Method. First, if you've got that credit card balance, you're going to want to pay that off first because it's $2,000 at 20% interest. Your student line of credit is going to come in next at $10,000 with 2.5% interest. And then your OSAP is going to come in last at $12,000 total with a 3.5% interest. And the bonus to that is, you don't have to worry about that one until after you've graduated. So it's kind of nice there. So a hybrid method when looking at all of these things is some combination of the previous two. Like if you feel like you just need a little bit of a win to get you started, and you've got a fairly low balance credit card, I like to keep a very low balance credit card. So I think when I was actively studying in school, my balance was like $1,000 to maybe $1,200 that I kept on my credit card. So when I graduated, even though that was at 20% interest and it was the highest one, I wasn't in danger of, suffering from trying to repay that. And I was able to either roll it into my student line of credit so that it was being paid off at a lower rate of interest and eliminate that source of debt entirely, or just pay it down with my payments from like my paycheck kind of thing if I was using it sort of infrequently for other purchases. And then after that, my focus was on the highest rate of interest debt that I had, which was the student line of credit I carried, which was at the next sort of highest value. So it took a while to pay that off, but ultimately, I'd understood that I had paid off a source of compound interest that was significantly higher, and I felt gratified that I succeeded at one of my goals. All right. So, a word of advice. The previous debt management strategies are guidelines to help you manage your personal situation. You're going to best be able to understand these by calculating how much each of your sources of debt are costing you each month in compound interest payments, as well as how long it would take you to eliminate that debt entirely. I would recommend looking over your finances with a professional, because not one of these ways is going to work better for every person. And, as I say, there's a big difference with carrying a 20% interest rate credit card with maybe $500 on it, as opposed to one with like $9,000 on it. So there's going to be a way that over time you're going to be reducing the amount you're paying in those compound interest payments. That's better for you than it might be for someone else, using one of these methods or a combination of the two of them, like the hybrid method I suggested. So please review your current sort of holdings in your accounts and the debts that you have with a professional, and come up with a strategy that works best for you to tackle the things that are going to cost you the most in the long run, so that you can save yourself the most money over time. And here's the reference slide for anyone who's interested in knowing where these sort of like stats and figures were pulled out of, or want to know more about effective ways to pay for school, or debt reduction methods and philosophies, or even just how to pay back your OSAP. All right. So that was the third session. Our fourth session is coming up next. I hope that's helped you in understanding a little bit about what it's going to take for you to pay off your debts, but overall, that you're feeling confident that you can walk into a financial institution and discuss with an expert over the best way to help you reduce the costs of carrying debt in your various accounts through your credit cards or your lines of credit that you may have open, that you're going to be dealing with in the long run. So thank you for listening, and we'll see you again next time.